How you doing? Good. Thanks for having me. Thank you. Sure.
Hey, I forgot to turn on my microphone again. This is the second one in a row. I just got a message from my colleague. Mark just heard what I was saying.
It was great.
But now the rest of you will hear what I was saying, which is that Mark and I had a conversation beforehand, and one has to go to get some of the shots that Mark is able to get or has been able to get. Most notably, actually, the shot of the buzzer beater from the Raptors playoffs that is now seen sort of around the world and has got you some recognition from the world press for the World Press Photo Award. So you're nominated for that, and that's really, really exciting. So let's start this conversation off by giving people a sense who may not be familiar with you and the work that you do, how you sort of describe yourself as a photographer, the world that you live within. Yeah, we'll let you take it off from there.
Sure. So I guess you could probably say photojournalist at heart. So in 2006, I graduated from Ryerson University, the Image Arts program. And quickly after that, I did an internship at a newswire called Reuters, which is a major international newswire, kind of like the AP. Um, And from there, I just covered news, sports, and as my career went on, um, I kind of more specialized in sports photography, and that's kind of what I do now. So currently, I am the team photographer for the Toronto Maple Leafs, um, and I also do a lot of work for the NBA. I do about 10 to 15 games for the NBA a season, and in the summer, I shoot a little bit of baseball. And yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
So tell me, one would think that if you're working in the realm of sports, that you were always a sports fan or a big sports fan, and I don't know
Right.
whether that's necessarily super true or not. But at some point, when you came out of school and you're working in a news agency, a newswire service, you're doing a lot of general photojournalism as well. How did that
Right.
path lead you to sports and away from general
Sure.
photojournalism?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people don't really realize, but photojournalism and sports photography are they kind of go hand in hand. Um, a lot of newspaper photographers are kind of like just kind of catch-all photographers. They'll go out and they'll shoot news, they'll go shoot a portrait for a story, and they'll go to a sports game at night. So for me, um, you know, to me, it really comes down to one thing. It's kind of like a bunch of moving objects that are a bunch of targets, and I have to somehow find the best picture. Whether that, previously in my career where I used to cover a lot of protests or news events, it's the same thing. It's all about trying to find the best picture out of the thing that is going on in front of you that you can't control. So,
And you said to me in our earlier conversation, and you have this great line about where are your 2 feet and why are they there?
right, right.
As a question that photographers need to be asking themselves. Can you explain that a little bit more and that the idea that how
Sure.
that guides you in your decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say, like, photography to me comes down to a couple of things. It's backgrounds and where you've put your 2 feet and why. So for me, there's a lot of thinking about what you're doing. It's not just sort of showing up 5 minutes before something starts and then you just use your knowledge and ooh, bang, there it is. No, that's not how it works at all. A lot of photojournalists and a lot of sports photographers think about what they're doing, why they're doing it, why they're putting their 2 feet in the place they can be. Now, sometimes your 2 feet are in a place uh, you're just there and you have to be there. There's a lot of times where you have a choice. You think about things. So for example, I'm at the arena, a lot. So I see all of the players' movements before the games. I see what they do after the game. I see generally how they celebrate, and all of these things I use to try and make a plan as to where I put my 2 feet and why.
And a lot of photography and a lot of art forms are really about knowing your medium and knowing the world that you live within. So to be a good, in this particular case, a good sports photographer, you actually have to know sports really well in the sense of having able to just sort of pick on it subconsciously by just being around a rink a lot, by being around a basketball court a lot. Were you just starting to recognize patterns, or was there photographers that went before you that were always like, listen, don't waste your time, just stand there, it's going to happen there every single time? Like, what's a combination of learning and adapting to the work that, the arena that you work within? How much of that was one or the other?
So I always say photography is a lot of trial and error. I think you can only become a good photographer when you make a mistake and you learn from it. That being said, when you're out on a job and somebody's paying you for something, to shoot something, there's a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, but there's pressure to find something. So it becomes a necessity. Photographers before me have taught me a lot. The best example would be, for example, if you're shooting tennis, right? And you notice that a tennis player keeps celebrating a certain way, but you're on the wrong side of the court. And you're like, well, why do they keep celebrating that way? As a young photographer, you just you don't even really think about that. You just go, well, I guess I'm in the wrong spot. Well, there's been a lot of photographers and mentors that have taught me things like this, but the reason a tennis player will celebrate a certain way every time is because they're celebrating towards their coach. So what do you do? So how do you become a better photographer? So you use information like that. So started out, and that sort of applies to everything now. Everything I do. If I can plan it and predict it, then for sure I'm going to do it. But it doesn't always work out that way. Not all photographs are because of you knew it was going to happen. You try to predict it as much as possible, but no. These are things you learn by watching patterns and by what people teach you.
We're going to get into all the equipment that's used to cover a game, particularly arena sports, whether it's hockey or basketball. And it's quite astounding, especially when you think to capture an important moment is not just about, to use a metaphor, but also to be pretty spot on, is not just following the puck. It's also, just having a lot of coverage, and you put cameras in places that are working remotely to make sure that it's not just the camera that's in your hands, it's the cameras that exist within the place as well. Give us a sense. I'm going to bring them up on the screen here because you've got a pretty big gear cache, and I want people to see this. So I'm just going to bring this up right now. We're looking at 5 Sony cameras here, a wealth of lenses. So talk about your personal kit, why you have the volume that you have, and which of the lenses do you find are the most useful in your trade?
Sure, I always get that question, well, which lens is your favorite? I don't really have a favorite lens. My favorite lens is the one I need at the time. Although I say if I did have a favorite focal length, it'd probably be 35 millimeters. If I could shoot everything at 35, I'd be very happy. But we can't, because we can't stand on the ice or the court. So we have lots of telephoto lenses. So as you can see on the right there, that's a big 400 millimeter 2.8. That's more for summer sports. A 400 to 2.8 in arena sports in the winter for basketball and hockey doesn't really work. It's for mainly soccer, football, baseball, and then there's your classic prime staple lens, which is 7200, which is kind of pretty much one of the most important sports lenses you could have, just because it gives you that nice versatility. If you had nothing else to cover a hockey game or a basketball game, if I can only bring one lens, it'd be a 70 to 200. And then I've got a lot of prime lenses there too. I love using prime lenses wide open because the apertures go out to 1.4. And I use a lot of the prime lenses to shoot stuff, kind of players in the hallways and, huddles before games and stuff. And it just provides me more light because the hallways are so dark. But you can really create some nice moody pictures with a wide open aperture at 1.4. It gets you more light to your sensor. And it also creates a nice little dreamy bokeh. Right. And then, of course, your standard zooms, 24 to 70, 16 to 35. Those are very important lenses to have, catch-all lenses. And then I've got 5 bodies. So normally, for a basketball game or a hockey game, I'll set up 2 remote cameras, which we can show a little later. And by remote camera, I mean you set up a camera somewhere and you fire it using a radio. So you're not actually hand-holding it. So you can see there. So these are all pictures of our setup. So this is a basketball setup. So this is pointed right down at the rim. And you can see different pictures there. You'll see a camera inside a little plastic box too. Which is a camera we actually put, that one right there. We actually put it directly in the net during a live game, and then we fire it using a pocket wizard. So it's super cool at the end of it. You don't get to see the pictures till the end of the game, but that camera will fire away right in the net. So there's a lot of different little creative things that you can do with remote cameras. It just helps widen out your coverage of a game. I concentrate mostly on my handheld cameras, but the remote cameras allow you to add angles that you wouldn't be allowed to stand in. Like, for example, we can't stand in the roof during a game. So we put a remote camera right in the roof, right? And everything's safetied off. And
And obviously you have to set up these cameras every single time. What's the setup time take? Like, how early do you get to the arena?
Yeah. So we get to the arena some days probably 4 or 5 hours ahead of time. And that's because we're setting up cameras and we're putting them, making sure they're safe and making sure they're working. And it's a lot of work. It's when you get home from a game, it's you're tired. You're really tired
during like a busy season. You're setting up all that stuff multiple times a week.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that when the end of the season comes, you definitely need your vacation.
Yeah, well, our teams have been good lately, so they play into the summer, so there isn't much rest. But you're getting there and you're setting all this stuff up, and it takes a very, very long time. I always joke when the game starts, it's a relief because you've already been working for 5 hours, and you just take a load off and shoot the game. But it is a lot of work.
So I want to talk about. I'm going to bring it up here. One of the photos that I noticed was that you've got. I'm going to bring it up right now. This one here. This is your camera with 3 triggers on it, and the triggers are on another device that's going into your hot shoe. So that would indicate that there's multiple strobes at place here. What are we seeing here, and what's the lighting that you're manipulating?
Sure. Yeah. So if you just leave this picture up, I'll explain it. So at the Scotiabank Arena, we have stadium strobes, and for people who don't know what strobes are, they're flashes. They're giant flash, they're giant flash heads, and we have them installed in the roof. So, and we have 4 sets of eight lights. So four different photographers could be on them at once. so basically what happens is when we fire the camera, one of those pocket wizards is letting go of the strobes in the roof. And so that creates a giant flash that typically most people don't even really notice. If you look at it, you can see it on television. But so as you notice, I have 3 radios on top of my handheld there. So one of them will fire the flash strobes for my handheld camera. And the other 2 I have set up to fire my different remotes. And then there's another picture where you can see, if you can go back there, where you can see there's buttons on the lens.
Yeah.
See those 2 buttons on the side of the lens? So those are the 2 buttons I use to fire my remote cameras. So for basketball, it could be a camera in the roof. It could be a camera that is underneath the net. In hockey, it could be a camera that's inside the net or a camera in the roof. There's endless possibilities with these.
You know, the 50s or 60s or something like that. That this would have had to be sort of a newer thing. What's the history behind developing and modernizing sports photography?
Yeah, I mean, actually, strobes have been being used for a very long time. For lots of old, like if you look at old NBA and NHL photographers, it'll be a single light source. Like the arenas were so dark back then, and people were using film that that just wasn't sensitive enough for the dark light to freeze any action. So photographers have been using strobes in arenas for a long time. But as time went on, you know, things got better, technology got better, the strobes got better, and so now in modern arenas, most modern arenas have strobes in the ceiling, and will illuminate the entire ice or basketball surface. To give you an idea, for example, at Scotiabank Arena, if your exposure was 3200 ISO, 1000 at 2.8, that's the available light, which is fine nowadays. You know, it's great. It's you know, sensors are amazing these days. But with a strobe, it becomes like our exposure becomes 160 ISO. So, you know, that's quite a bit of quality difference. And what the strobes do is they really fill in all the shadows, and they just make everything so bright. They make the colors on the uniform pop out. And it looks, you know, the difference between a strobe picture and available light picture, you can tell. The quality is just out of this world. But the trade-off is, you know, on a Sony A9 where you could shoot 20 frames per second using available light, you can't do that with a strobe, obviously, because it would just blow up. But so you get one picture every 2 seconds. So it becomes difficult to start timing your pictures and start and being able to really freeze that action and hitting the shutter at the right time really becomes a lot more difficult. And it's not, and I'm not saying I'm the best at it. I don't think anyone really is. It's just you do get pretty good at it, but every game you're gonna be either early or late. But when you do really nail something, it's really nice.
I think we're going to have a lot of sports fans, or, you know, obviously tuning in. And I kind of want to go through some of the major sports that you cover and talk about some of your strategies.
Sure.
for people who might be shooting amateur even or semi-pro sports, some things that they can take away from your experience.
Right, yeah.
And then we've got a bunch of questions that actually just came in. So we'll start
Sure.
with hockey, because I think that's something that you know probably the best. And then
Sure.
we'll take some questions, and then we'll kind of follow through with some of the other sports. So tell us about, you know,
Sure.
if I'm a hockey photographer or an aspiring hockey photographer, what are the things that I'm really looking for in order to capture the story of a hockey game, or
Right.
the experience
Right.
of what the players are going
Right.
through?
Right. Yeah, this is a question I get a lot. Like, what do you do? So if you're around a hockey team enough, you'll start to figure out the stories, right? There's lots of little things like the players' personalities. There's all sorts of things that come out. I think the biggest mistake people make when they start out being a sports photographer is that they just go to the game and they shoot whatever happens, while play's going on. A lot of the best stuff comes when you can start showing personality of the players, right? Like we shoot the players arriving. We try to get some access, behind the scenes access, and shoot players getting ready. We try to show, everything else around the game. The action is important too, of course, but I think people are really interested in personal stories and personal things about the players rather than just the plays on the ice. I mean, there's a whole bunch, or on the court. I mean, there's a whole bunch of beautiful action pictures that happen all the time. But for example, if something huge happens and a player celebrates, that's an important sports picture. That's part of a storyteller. It's not just action. It's not just checks and dunks and home runs. It's the players.
And what are the publishers after? Because they specifically must drive a lot of that creative. You must be asking yourself,
right?
Well, this is what's going to sell. This is what they need. Is there a pattern to what they're asking for?
Yeah. I mean, they just want the story of the game. And sometimes it's an action picture. Sometimes it's a picture of a player dejected after they've been eliminated from the playoffs, or sometimes it's a player celebrating. It could be any number of things. But like, for example, when I worked for the team, the Maple Leafs love celebration photos, right? And the players love the celebration photos too. In hockey, it's not always easy to shoot a goal because, your frame is only so wide. And if they score from the blue line or something, you're not going to shoot as wide to have the whole blue line in the net in the picture. So sometimes it's not always the goal. Like a player will shoot it from, a place you won't be photographing, but then the picture becomes the celebration, right? So you still tell the story without seeing the actual goal. You see the celebration.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm going to address a bunch of these questions that just rolled in here.
Sure.
The first one is from Richard Andoga, and this is a great question. How do you address white balance, especially when you've got the white balance or the temperature of your strobes versus the temperature of the house lights and all this sort of stuff? What's your strategy there?
Yeah. So I'll speak to both. So when I'm at an arena and I don't have access to strobes, like let's say I'm shooting in an away arena, we do a white balance before it all starts. A lot of arenas are switching to LED lighting now, so it's basically just straight up daylight. But there is arenas that don't have that, and they have annoying flickering light. So one of the good features on these modern cameras, and I know the Sonys have it now too, is anti-flicker, where the camera will wait to shoot when there's not a flicker going on, so you don't have a bad colored photograph. But yeah, for the most part, like for example, I'll go to a rink and I'll just shoot white ice, and then I'll put that into my camera's color balance, and I just tell the camera that's what the color white is, and then it'll just do the rest. And then with strobes are just daylight balanced. So, and they overpower the arena light. So we just set it to daylight.
Speaking of strobes and such, we got another question about your strobe power specifically, which is, is there a time where I'll actually read the exact question. Would it be a trade-off to reduce the strobe power, raise the ISO to accept some shots that are, filled with strobe and some shots not? Can it work like that?
Yeah, so there's kind of a happy place where you want to put your strobe power. If you lower your strobe power, the risk is becoming too close to daylight. And I think the rule is you got to be 3 or 4 stops brighter than the arena light to freeze the action. Because if not, then the daylight starts to creep into the picture, and then you start getting ghosting. Because you have to remember, our cameras are set to 1/250th of a second, not 1,000, so we can sync with the strobes. So what actually happens is the strobe becomes your shutter speed. So if the strobe is open, like our strobes, I think go to 1/16 or I'm not sure, 1/1000th of a second. So the strobe is open for 1,000th of a second, and your shutter's open for 2/50th of a second. That means once the strobe has gone off and it's finished, your shutter's still open, which means available light is still creeping in. It's getting pretty technical and nerdy, but if you can follow, that's the issue, is that you don't want any daylight creeping in, or it's not daylight, arena light creeping in.
Awesome. A slight non sequitur from that, but related to a game. Mark Lafleur asks, do you file your photos between periods and halves, or are you given a sort of shot list for the game, and do you file at the end of the game?
Right.
And I'm going to tack on another question to that.
Sure.
Presumably you're filing JPEGs. Is there any time that you're going to shoot raw and then submit later
Right.
after you've corrected?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a mouthful to answer all those questions, but I'll let you have at it.
Okay, so there's two different answers for that. So when I work on my own, I do a lot of work for Getty Images and the Canadian Press. So when I'm working for them, I will shoot, and then I'll go and I'll furiously file between halves and periods, and I'll try to get 2 or 3 pictures out, and then I'll try to run back so I don't miss anything. That's when I'm working on my own. When I would do it for the NHL and the NBA and the Leafs, there is some budget to hire an editor and a technical person to help. So during the Maple Leafs, we have another photographer. His name's Kevin Souza. You should look him up. And we both shoot the game, and then we have an editor. His name's Andrew Lahadinsky, who's a very, very good editor. And so we ship our cards back to him, and he furiously edits them and gets them out on the Getty wire, because NBA and NHL pictures all go to Getty. And then as he sends to Getty, they go into a Dropbox for the social media director at the Maple Leafs, and he has access to those pictures to use on social. So, and the question between RAW and JPEG, I try to shoot RAW as much as possible. It does. There's a little bit more time when you come back to ingest, but if your shutter speed was off, or a strobe didn't go off or something like that, you have a lot more latitude to fix the image in the end. While it does take a little bit more time shooting RAW, I think it's worth it in the end.
And when it comes, I was going to go somewhere else with that, but I think the year you had last year and the shot that you got, one would assume that your instincts with basketball are pretty good. Tell us a little bit about what we're looking for in basketball photography and the story we're looking to tell there, and how it might be different than other sports.
In basketball, I mean, I don't know. Basketball is all sort of it's a shot. It's a sport, I think, better shot a little bit wider. I find that it's a little bit more storytelling, where you can see where everybody is on the court. And for me, that's kind of how I like to approach basketball. I shoot hockey kind of the same way too, I guess. I like to shoot just a little bit wider, just so I can try to tell those stories. But with basketball, it's all about the dunks, the plays, the reactions. Like we even shoot, like with basketball, we even shoot their shoes. There's a big market for shoe pictures as well. But basketball, there's a lot of different ways. Basketball is probably the best sport that lends itself to remote cameras, just because there's so many things that you can do.
Well, you got that classic, I think you got on your site here. I'm gonna bring it up here. It's that beautiful top-down shot, right above the basket, and even for the center court, things like that. It's just such a great aspect that we see in modern culture. I mean, anything that has to do with basketball in films and movies or whatever, we see so many of these beautiful top-down shots because of the way the courts are designed. Can you speak to that at all, about just artistically nice photos?
So this is a remote camera in a roof, right? So I'm not shooting this handheld. So what happens is, There's all sorts of beautiful stuff that happens because they're jumping up, right? And they're always looking up and into the rim. This is a picture that doesn't really normally happen. You don't really see a basketball player on their own usually. So that's what kind of makes this one unique. It's one of my favorites. But normally, I mean, you could set this remote up any way you want. You can have it just so you see that half circle. In this case, I decided to show the entire key. And I just, got lucky that this happened. Pascal Siakam going to the net. So,
super random question, but when you're shooting sports with the camera that's in your hand, how many times are you shooting portrait versus landscape? Is there a particular modality?
Right. Basketball is again one of those sports that is shot vertically. To me, it's best. Like a lot of basketball is just because it's up and down sport. But I still trying to find myself shooting it horizontally. I don't know. It's been ingrained in my brain to shoot horizontally for whatever reason.
Because I know in other professional photography realms, that aspect has a lot to do with the final output. So if you're going to be a magazine cover, it needs to be portrait. If you're going to be a magazine spread, you can potentially have landscape. So how much do your publishers dictate what photos get used because of the aspect ratio or the...
So I guess the reason why I just kind of like to shoot horizontally is because back in the day, not really, years ago, when newspapers became way more important online than in print, newspapers were always asking for horizontal pictures, just because they work best on the web.
Right.
But again, if you look at old magazines or fashion photographers or even Sports Illustrated, they want that beautiful vertical picture for the cover.
Right. And
so now with Instagram, now I'm finding that since you can cover the most screen with a vertical picture, I find myself looking for more vertical pictures these days, just because it looks unbelievable on the screen when it's filling your phone vertically. It looks amazing. If you have a beautiful horizontal picture, it's great, but you don't get as much screen real estate anymore. So,
and I've got a question here from Josie that I think is really interesting, and will take us sort of maybe into our next sports. Out of the sports that you shoot, which are the most challenging to get the shots that you're after?
Yeah. Geez, that's a tough one. Hockey is probably the toughest because how we work, we shoot through a little hole in the glass, and then you got to sit on a stool, and so you're kind of swinging back and forth. So it can be tough. Like we got it great in Toronto. We have an amazing rink where we can sit on a stool. Other rinks, you got to sit on a step beside fans, and it's really uncomfortable. There's some photographers that use skateboards. They put their knees on skateboards and they swing back and forth. Yeah, you can see in this picture here, we have it great. But most rinks, you're sitting on the stairs beside, at the bottom of the stairs beside fans, like beer's getting spilt on you. People are talking to you. It's awful. You're trying to work. But at our rink, we have a great, we have space to sit. So I would say hockey is probably the toughest sport to shoot out of all of them. Because with bass, sure.
Well, I was going to say I'm fascinated by that because when you look at some of your other work, like tennis, there's soccer, there's the track at cycling at the velodrome. These aren't sports that you shoot all the time, and yet you're able to go into those environments and get some really beautiful, amazing shots as though these are sports that you shoot all the time. With that in mind, when you go into a sport that you're not as familiar with, how is that challenge compared to the challenges of the sports that you know better?
Again, it just comes down to, if you really simplify it, you really take everything away from it. It's understanding what the sport is, and really, if you just strip it down to moving objects, and then something's going to happen at this certain time, that's how you do it. And like being a sports photographer, like you you start to understand that if you shoot a lot of basketball, you shoot a lot of hockey or baseball, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into a weird Olympic sport that you've never looked at before. Right. The only thing you can do is try to understand it, and then look at what other people have done, read about it, try to understand it, and then you can make a decision of, you know, where you want to put your 2 feet and how you want to do it. So, I mean, a lot of the knowledge is crossed. You know, a lot of the sports, like when you shoot one sport, a lot of that knowledge crosses over to another one.
Right. There's some universal truths in sports. I think that's what draws people to them. There's a sense of victory. There's a sense of obstacles. There's a sense of celebration. All those things are often the same, regardless of the puck or the ball or the stick or whatever the case may be.
Like, for example, I went to shoot some rugby, and I say, hey, listen, tell me what happens. Like, when do they celebrate? Why does it? And then the photographer told me, well, you got to stand here because this will happen. Or you should stand over here because this team's better and you'll get more action, you know? And it's just little things like that. Okay, you're armed with a little bit of knowledge. You could fake it as a rugby photographer. I mean, it's just knowledge.
Awesome. I've got 2 questions that came in here. I want to address those before we move on. From Justin Tang. Hey, Mark, strobes have been in arenas forever, but your lighting work is superb with so much contrast, texture, and punch. Can you talk about your methodology and what makes your approach different?
I know Justin, colleague of mine, good kid, a good photographer too. So with regards to strobes, I've started experimenting a little bit. So we have eight strobes on a line, and instead of turning them all on, I'll just turn one on. So I don't know if you could pull up the website and see if we can find a good example. See if we could find an example of that. In any case, they're tough to find here. Hold on. If you look at the hockey stuff, you'll see there's a picture of a goalie, and the background's darker. If you can find it, if not. So basically, what I try to do is I try to turn on different lights. And let's just say if you just turn one light on at a time, then the whole background goes darker, right? So I'm able to really selectively light things and make a more theatrical look. Like, for example, this picture, if you stop on that, if you go back to the face-off picture there. So this is a perfect example of turning on one strobe light. Okay, so this is a remote camera in the roof, and I was trying to get these 2 players lining up all game, and it only happened once. So that's Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, 2 of the biggest generational players of their respective teams. If you see the shadow falling, like, you don't see that normally in hockey. But so I've just left one light on coming from the bottom of the frame, which is casting that shadow, which is what gives it sort of that old time look. And so normally I would have the strobe on the other side on, and it would fill in those shadows and you wouldn't see it. So that's a direct creative decision when using strobes.
Very cool. We've got some other questions here. Let's see, from Irma. I understand that for Reuters or any newswire, you are very limited to what you may do with the editing, cropping, or, for example. Are you ever tempted to edit any more to sort of perfect the shot?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about photojournalism ethics 101, which means when you're a photojournalist, the rules are pretty strict and harsh. Fixing exposure or adding some contrast or cropping, that's all kind of cool. That's all okay. But when you start getting into photoshopping, like removing elements from a picture, adding elements to a picture, that's a giant no-no, a career ender. So those are all rules that I've always stuck by and always will.
Can you say submit the JPEG or whatever for the newswire, but then later look at it and go, oh, I could probably vignette this a certain way, and I could probably change the color of something a little bit way, and then I'll submit that for, to be published in a magazine where it's less about the timing of the journalism. Is that allowed? Is that?
Generally, it's frowned upon. I mean, there is a certain amount of rules that you can follow. If you go to like the World Press Photo website, which is kind of the standard of photojournalism contests, they'll give you a perfect example of what they find acceptable. For example, what they find acceptable is probably a good standard for photojournalists in the whole. But I still keep that, if there's a picture that, you don't see a puck or you wish the ball was a little bit over there, or you wish that, it's just, you live with it. Like, that's just it. And that's part of it, because being a photojournalist, you don't want to lie. Right. And that would be lying almost, and God forbid journalists lie. So we don't do that at all. And I would say even most sports photographers, pretty much all sports photographers I know, follow that rule.
Again, a little bit of a diversion here from that line of thought, but Thomas has a great question about, for athletes, the playoffs can be a very different time for them, a very different way that they approach their strategies in terms of their preparation and things like that. But for photojournalists and sports photographers, are you changing anything in terms of the way you operate during playoffs? Are you after different shots than you would be during the regular season? What's that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so everything changes. The playoffs instantly become about reaction. I would say reaction photos are probably a little bit more important than the actual play, but not all the time. You also, in playoffs, we want to shoot a little bit wider. We want to show a little bit more. For example, the Kawhi shot, his buzzer beater picture, that's kind of a perfect example of how you switch up your mentality for playoffs. Normally we'd be shooting a lot more tighter and we just kind of get like straight up action pictures. But when there's a big moment that happens, I've always been taught to go a little bit wider, because you don't really, first of all, you don't really want to miss anything. And second of all, you definitely want to come home with that picture. So, like, for example, this picture here, the Kawhi Leonard buzzer beater, I made a conscious decision to keep shooting a little bit wider. I wouldn't normally shoot this wide for normal play, but in playoffs, it's such a big moment that you want to capture all that atmosphere. Like I was taught a long time ago, at the end of any basketball game, doesn't matter, playoffs, regular season, if there's a chance that a player can win the game with one shot, at any cost, try to get the player and the basket and the ball all in the frame. Doesn't matter if it ends up being too wide. That's what you want, because that's kind of like the significant moment that you want to get. And
kind of speaking of a shot like that, do you recall, sort of as you were going and coming up on your journey as a sports photographer, were there any specific shots that either helped propel your career forward or sort of stood the test of time and you kind of got known for it? Any stories there around important moments?
In terms of like other photographers?
No, just for you. Was there a photo that you took that got you a little bit more recognition, and that helped move your career forward? Like say back in the day when you're at Reuters, or?
I don't know if I can really think of anything. Recently, obviously, that Kawhi picture did, but in the past, I mean, there was a ton of stuff, but I've never really been in front of a moment of that magnitude, like the Kawhi picture. Right. I've shot a lot of really cool stuff, But I guess my hockey at the Olympics for Reuters did help propel my career, um, uh, which was good. But yeah, I can't really think of anything.
And what about just from a personal perspective? Are there shots that you look back on and be like, man, I'm so happy about that, just from a personal point of view?
Yeah, again, there's a picture at the Olympics of Crosby scoring. I wasn't at the gold medal game in Vancouver, but I was at I shot hockey in Sochi, the Olympics in Russia. And I was really happy I had Crosby's goal. It's you could see it if you go to the website. It's the first. If you go to the portfolio page, you can see it. It's the one that says, if you click portfolio, then you go to, click that, and then you go to the Olympics there. That picture of Sidney Crosby scoring is pretty special to me. So you can see it if you scroll down a bit, but that was a huge moment for me. As I was, it was only 6 years ago, but I still consider myself a young photographer then. This was a remote camera. I also had it on my handheld because I was sitting in the corner, and he celebrated right to me. And to me, that was a big moment in my career of, I was super nervous shooting that game. And I knew, having the story of the Crosby golden goal in 2010, and I didn't know what this hockey game was gonna be like. I didn't know if it was gonna be another classic like that. It ended up being like a 3-0 win, pretty standard, boring hockey game. But when it was done, I was so relieved because I just didn't know what to expect, and it's just like your nerves in a situation like that do creep up.
And you brought something up, which is something I actually meant to ask you earlier on, this idea of just being nervous, because usually when people do something for such a long time, they kind of go into autopilot mode. And I mean, yes, you were younger then, you were newer in your career then, a little bit less experience. And of course, it's an Olympics game. There's a lot on the line. There's a lot of things. But like, what's the situation now? Like, what are the kind of things that actually turn your adrenaline up a little bit and make you nervous now?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, if you're not nervous, you don't care. Right. That's what I'll say, because, or maybe it doesn't matter as much to you, but to me, like when I'm nervous, doesn't mean your work gets better or worse. It just means that you're at a heightened sense of awareness, I guess you could say.
Because I guess like there's something on the line both for you professionally, but also you're representing the city or the nation or the province, and in the case of the gold medal game, you're a Canadian in Canada, hoping for a Canadian win, so that adds to everything else, right?
Adds to everything. Yeah, I mean, the biggest moments happen in front of you, right? And that's the thing. The biggest worries do I have the right lens on? Am I too wide? Am I too tight? All these things. But I think as time goes on, and I've been in these situations a lot, I calm myself down by reminding myself that I've been there before. And, if it happens in front of me, I'm going to get it. So that's just, but you still think about things like that, right? You want it to go your way. You want to be in the right spot. You want to have the right lens on.
I got a great question here from Etienne Dupuis. And Etienne says, in non-sports photography, it is a good thing to develop your style. This is something that we hear constantly, define your style. So the question is here, is this something that exists in sports? Is that even possible to develop your particular style when, what we're looking at is uncontrollable? What do you say to that?
Absolutely. There's a lot of photographers that do a lot of different things in sports. My style's always been, high contrast in your face. That's kind of the stuff I like to shoot the most. I've sort of taught myself to try to shoot some more subtle moments as well, which is important. But there's other photographers that just do unbelievable things and just catch, you know, the way they look at something is just different, right? It's no different in sports photography. There's photographers that do all sorts of different wacky stuff. There's photographers that shoot, on camera flash, and their things are like trying to get the players, the culture, people
Right.
showing up. There's people who use disposable cameras. There's people who shoot film. There's all sorts of styles and stuff that you can really get in.
Have
you can get into.
Ever, like at least in recent memory, when you've really staked your claim as a sports photographer, or if you had to do something that's not sports related, how do you feel about shooting that type of stuff?
Yeah, again, like I said, just being a photojournalist at heart, photojournalists can shoot a lot of different situations. We may not be the best fashion photographer, but we can shoot a portrait, right? So it's all the same to me. When you bring it down to the bare bones of it's something you need to get a picture out of. It's just you have to understand it and then go and shoot it. But to answer your question, not really, not lately. I used to get a lot of requests to shoot things, for universities and, for university guides and stuff, and you shoot a photojournalist style. But, once I've sort of gotten into the sports realm, it's just sort of been all sports.
We're kind of getting close to closing out the conversation, but I want to actually go back with a microscope and talk about this photojournalism, because this idea of the decisive moment and understanding that your job as a photographer is some hybrid of archivist, storyteller, and artist. For people who are just general photography enthusiasts who want to just understand the craft of photography and how what you learned from photojournalism can apply to a wide range of photography concepts. Any insights or advice around that people can take away from?
That's a pretty tough question. Yeah, I mean, I feel like photography's become, I think it's become a little bit more democratized now, just with Instagram and the way everything is. I feel like what used to be good isn't anymore, and what is good is, won't be in a couple of years. But to me, I always feel that a classic, an image that just has something that tells a story, is lit well, is shot well, always stands the test of time. I mean, that's the one beauty thing about photojournalism and that style, is that it's classic and it won't ever go away. I mean, you could have a bad picture of a good moment and it's iconic, absolutely. Right? You could.
And you actually mentioned this earlier when we talked about your kit. You said that if you could have one lens, it would just be like a 35 mil, nice and wide. Yeah. And to me, that's photojournalism, right? That's street photography, photojournalism, wide and get close, right? Things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's that quote, if your picture isn't good, you're not close enough. I don't know. To me, it's just like, a good picture is a good picture, and I can appreciate that in any form. I look at a fashion photographer, I'll look at photojournalists, I'll look at a portrait photographer, street photographers, right? I just really think the way photography is going, it's all sort of kind of going into one big pile of pictures, right? That I don't think there's any one style anymore, right? That stands out. There's just so many people doing good stuff.
And when you look at photography, what inspires you? Do you kind of have your favorite Instagram photographers, or do you have photo books that you're like, oh, you always go through this one because man, these are such inspiring images? Anything like that stand out for you?
Yeah. Instagram, I love Instagram. I look at a lot of stuff, and you can learn a lot by looking at what other photographers do. And photographers copy each other for sure. I do it. Everybody does it. you try to elaborate on ideas that you've seen. But I draw a lot of inspiration from my peers and colleagues, for sports photographers and other photographers that I just respect in general.
Is that also because they're working sort of parallel to you, so they're creating shots that, with a different mindset, so they're creating shots that you could never create and vice versa, but it's modern and current, so when you see something, you have a sense that it's what the public wants now, it's what the publishers want now. Is that kind of what drives that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's amazing looking at what other people are doing, and it's like, oh, I didn't think of that, or oh, wow, that's a good idea. And just everybody just feeds off each other. I mean, I know Instagram gets crapped on for a lot of things, but there's a lot of good things that come from it too. You can really see what other people are doing, and it's a good way to appreciate photography, and it's a good way to get feedback on your images too. So, I mean, I love things like that. I just wish it wasn't so abundant, but at the same time, I mean, that's what it is. It's Instagram.
Right. But presumably you still believe that like the cream sort of rises to the top, and if you are making a living doing it, it's not just that you're a good artist, but that you're reliable, and that when money's on the line, you can produce, right? And so, at least I don't know what your theory is, but my feeling is that
it's Instagram, so it's a lot different too. There's I find that a lot of photographers are using their personality too, and people are drawn to that, right? And so that's kind of a cool part of Instagram too, is you can delve into a photographer's thing. You leave a question, they can answer you, or they choose not to, but they can answer you, like how, oh, how'd you do that, or what were your thoughts on this? So that's what I like.
Yeah, this level of interaction never really existed before. You'd have to.
I would also say too, like if you like a photographer, like popularity shouldn't be about followers or anything like that. I mean, there's photographers that are doing great things that you just go to the page and you can see. So that's what I love about Instagram anyways, is that you can see all this stuff that people are doing.
Awesome. Well, Mark, this has been an awesome conversation. You actually enlightened me all the things I was curious about, and I hope that the audience also shares in that. Really appreciate your time. We look forward, I think, collectively when sports are back on, when the teams are playing, when the stadiums are full and the arenas are full, and you're back to work. In the meantime, thank you so much for making the time, and we look forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mark. Have a great day.